terms of the Middle East, I don't think we've seen such transformation probably since 1979. And you know, today Colonel Gaddafi came out and called for all Islamic jihadists to come to Libya. And it's of great concern to me and to everyone. I think, and I'll talk about more specifically what I think is happening in each of these countries, but I think as the Admiral has pointed out, you know, the movement has a tide in terms of the revolutions, but each country is very, very different in terms of what is happening. But to really put it, I think, in context, I like to kind of step back and sort of look at, you know, culturally, historically, this part of the region, you know, the Arab nations, the Middle East, what has happened in the past. And you can go back to the first golden age when they were selling frankincense, and that was sort of their gold. Petra, the architecture, they emulated the Greeks and the Romans. That was their first golden age. The second golden age, the age of Muhammad, where they were sort of the Renaissance period in terms of their enlightenment. And now I think when you talk to a lot of the Islam world, they view this as their third golden age that they're entering into. Oil is the modern day frankincense to fund this movement. The Muslim community, I believe, and the Islam community are 99% hardworking, decent people. We respect their religion. There is a very, very tiny fraction that is very radical. And they pervert the teachings of Muhammad and the Islam faith. That is the focus that we are looking at today. That is the threat today. And you know, you need to look. We go back and look at what happened, particularly after World War II when the partitions took place. You know, Churchill drawing maps over a brandy and a cigar, and you know, you looked at what happened in India, where you had a civil war going on between the Hindus and the Muslims, and the country of Pakistan was created. And then, of course, the state of Israel was created roughly around the same time in Palestine. A conflict that still reverberates today, a conflict that we're still dealing with, a conflict that actually bombs went off today in Jerusalem, killing many on a bus. And it's amazing to me. It's all about the lines. If anyone's ever been to Jerusalem, you can the intensity is very palpable because you have a city divided into three: Christian, Muslim, and Jewish. And Israel lives in a state of high alert constantly from this threat of radical Islam. There's no easy answer to any of this. I personally had my concerns about our engaging in conflicts in this region because every time we do that, there is a ripple effect. And there's a law of unintended consequences. And we become a rallying cry for the enemies. You know, you look at 1979, which I refer to as really transforming the Middle East when you have the Ayatollah. And of course, this is another policy we've had in the past. We supported the Shah. We support these dictators for stability and security reasons. The Shah was overthrown. President Carter at the time thought the Ayatollah was a religious spiritual leader, which I guess arguably he is. He's a very dangerous leader. And that act in 1979 reverberated throughout the Middle East, through the Arab world, through the Saudis. The Wahhabi sect became more empowered. Then at the same time, you have the Soviets invading Afghanistan, ironically, the exact same year. We got involved in that conflict, and to a large extent, that was one of the reasons why the Soviet Union collapsed. But at the same time, we created a force, if you will, that we're still dealing with today, and that is the Mujahideen. You know, bin Laden was part of this effort. Interestingly, when I was, when I went over to Pakistan, Afghanistan 2 years ago, 4th of July, to look at the battle plans for our troops, and they studied what how the Soviets fought the same tribal leaders that we are fighting today over there. And that was a really interesting trip. went to 3 bases on the Pakistan border. One was Ghazni. 3 of our soldiers had been murdered the day before. And when they kill our soldiers over there, what they do to the bodies is very disgraceful. And they were angry. And they said, you know, Congressman, they're coming out of there, and they pointed at Pakistan, and they're coming over here, and they're killing us. I took that message back to the president, at that time President Bush in the White House, obviously very aware of the situation in the tribal area in Pakistan, which had allowed to fester. We were involved in Iraq, and you know, and this area, in my judgment, needed more attention. He was very acutely aware of this, and at that very moment was working out a plan with Condoleezza Rice and Secretary Gates to the Predator drone project, which in my judgment has been a highly successful program in terms of taking out high-value targets in one of the most dangerous areas of the world, the epicenter, if you will, for terrorism. What that has essentially done has decentralized Al-Qaeda's command and control operations, so now they're down to 1 to 2-man operations. But stepping back, prior to 9/11, there were a lot of signs along the way. You know, you had Ramzi Youssef, '93 World Trade Center bomber, who escapes. He's eventually hunted down and captured in Islamabad. And the FBI agent who arrested him is a good friend of mine. And one thing that was kind of eerie about his story was that what they found in his room when they arrested him, and they found baby dolls, and they found chemical explosives. And the plot was the Joinka plot, to blow up 12 airlines simultaneously over the Pacific Ocean. But the idea of using baby dolls to get through security shows you sort of the sinister sort of eeriness of this enemy and what we're confronted with. And while he was over there, he visited with his uncle, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. And they discussed in the mid-90s the ideas of flying airplanes into buildings. That vision, obviously, was accomplished on September the 11th. I had the dubious distinction to see Khalid Sheikh Mohammed down in Guantanamo, and my visit down there was during his prayer hour. And it was very eerie to see what I'd consider to be evil incarnate. A very resolved look on his face. And we were dealing with an enemy that's very resolved. They still are determined to do us harm. And when you look at kind of the 1 to 2-man operations that we've seen over the past 2 years alone, you know, we've had somewhere between 27 to 30 of these homegrown terror plots. And where the terrorist is evolving now is into a radicalization. We had hearings on radicalization, and Pete King got a lot of very controversial. But the idea is not real controversial in my judgment, because it wasn't the committee attacking the Muslim community. The moderate Muslim is our greatest ally in this effort. It was a way to enlighten the American people as to what's happening today, and that is that our Muslim youth are being targeted in the United States. And you don't have to look far. There are 27 cases that I just discussed. We had one in Lubbock the other day. You know, 2 weeks ago, the arrest in Lubbock. By the way, he had baby dolls and chemical explosives. I think the Christmas bomber, the Times Square bomber, we've been very fortunate and very lucky in a lot of these instances. But one case that we were not lucky, where I believe we made mistakes and caused the greatest casualty since 9/11 on American soil, was Mr. Hassan, Major Hassan at Fort Hood, and the massacre of 13 soldiers and 1 unborn. And I went to the ceremony, you know, the 13 boots with the rifles and the helmets. Just devastating to think that how could this happen in the United States on our, not only on American soil, but at one of our military bases. We know they're targeting our bases. I was one of the first to come out and say this was an act of terrorism. And the more information I had coming in was confirming this, that this wasn't some crazy lone, wolf nutcase. This was a methodical act of terrorism. And when we discovered that he'd been talking to what I consider to be one of the most dangerous threats since bin Laden, the cleric in Yemen, al-Awlaki, You know, Laki is the one who's trying to program the Muslim youth in this country through these websites and jihadist websites. But when we discovered that Hassan had actually had multiple communications with Laki, and that we knew about it. You know, the FBI, through their surveillance of Laki, knew that there's a major, our largest military installation, talking to one of the greatest threats to the security of the United States, and yet that information was never shared with Fort Hood. You know, I talked to General Cohen about it. Wouldn't you like to have known that you had a major on your base who was starting to radicalize and talking to Laki? Maybe you could have put him under observation at least. I plan to have hearings, you know, on this very issue. We need to do, so many years after 9/11, we're still not connecting the dots properly. That was a classic failure of connecting the dots, and we just maybe could have saved some lives in the process. I talked to one of the guys on crutches, the best evidence, what did he scream before he shot, you know, all of you? Allahu Akbar, which is the classic jihadist, you know, God is great. Within the Department of Defense now, I believe 7 or 8 individuals are being reprimanded because of their inability to stop what was a radicalization. I mean, he was proselytizing radical Islam at lectures for his, as a psychiatrist. And in his reviews, they said, well, he understands the other side very well. He got promoted, and then he got transferred to Fort Hood, even though all on the way, whether it was the garb he was wearing, the proselytizing, it was very clear this man was radicalizing, and that we had to be very politically correct about it within the Department of Defense. And that, I believe, contributed to what happened, you know, that horrible day. So where are we today? I think these 1 to 2 man operations is where they're headed. But if you look, if we go back to where I started now in terms of the Middle East, I think we have to be very careful. Our presence there ignites them. Our presence there puts a bullseye on us. I personally think with respect to Libya, we had an opportunity 10 days ago to eliminate the threat, and that's Colonel Gaddafi. We failed in that. And now we're involved in a no-fly zone that has no exit strategy, could be very costly to the American people. I believe it's estimated $100 million a week. Each Tomahawk missile is $1.5 million. And then, again, what is the end game? I do think the President's correct in saying we should be the guys taking the lead on this because of our face in the Middle East. But can we hand this operation over to the allies and have them successfully pull it off? And will it just be a protracted, you know, operation just like we had in Iraq, and a very costly one at a time when our nation has a tough budgetary time? I personally think there's a threat very close to the United States, and it's our neighbor to the south, that we ought to be focusing more on and more resources on.